The lantern burns low. In its trembling glow, truth stands naked. You arrive here, drawn by a silence you no longer trust, and I speak not to comfort, but to unveil what you already know. That desire, the hungry heartbeat behind every breaths, the architect of your suffering. It begins there behind your eyes where the will murmurs of futures that never come, of joys never lasting. In this trembling seed of longing, the soul finds its first wound. To want is to open yourself to fracture, and yet we continue, as if hope were our only currency. From the moment memory collects its first fragment of time, we begin constructing prisons of what could be, of what we think we need. Every want is a stairway built on air, every satisfaction, a fragile tapestry that unravels in the next moment. But do not mistake this for despair, this is clarity. To see the machinery of wanting, to hold the will in your hand and look upon its gears, is the beginning of reclamation. We chase images, status, love, recognition mirages in the desert of consciousness. And each time we kneel before a mirage, we carve our desire deeper into being, not yet aware that the will, not the world, is our true architect of suffering. The world offers illusions as solace, technology's glow, society's applause, consumer thrills, yet each false promise is a hone sharpening our disquiet. We gaze upon screens not because the world has grown more luminous, but because the darkness within demands distraction. In that hollow hum of connection, we seek connection and find only the echo of our own emptiness. Pause. Let the weight of this land on your chest for a moment. Feel how desire tightens its grasp, how each promise yields dust in your hand. This is not failure, it is the unveiling you sought. You have glimpsed what lies behind every want, and in the glimpse, the aching quiet of truth. There is a strange relief in this recognition. The machinery that once demanded your obedience now lies exposed. You breathe without striving, simply because you see what was never nourishing. In that calm, the will's power loosens not through denial, but through recognition. Suffering becomes a teacher, desire, a signpost pointing back to what you already are beneath the chase. Step by step, let the vision deepen. Our lives are carved by the will not because the world requires more, but because we demand it. We shape ourselves into vessels for longing, only to find that every vessel leaks. To awaken is to stop pouring, and to witness the empty shape of your own longing. Can the container be held, even when it's empty? Can you meet the loneliness at the heart of want without flinching? This is the crucible. That moment, facing your own demand for more, and choosing to stay not to extinguish, but to face the flame. In that meeting, something shifts. The will recedes from its throne, not dethroned by force, but by its own reflection. And in its reflection, you glimpse space. It feels like loss, but it is not loss. It is a birth, of transparency, of stillness. The pain remains not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with pain has. You no longer hide from it behind desires that always fail. You welcome it, and in welcoming, it becomes your companion, rather than your enemy. Remember now, your path is carved by an ancient architect, the will, and your suffering by its inevitable dissatisfaction. But in the mirror of recognition, you find not exile but home. A home of quiet lucidity, where pain and desire no longer compel you into frenzy. Here, in this lantern-lit soul monologue, the final flame burns not with triumph, but with simple surrender, not defeat but quiet assent to the shape of what is. The will persists, but no longer commands. Suffering persists, but no longer defines. You exist, lucid and bare, with no story to sustain, no future to chase, nothing to become, and finally the relief of being. And so the voice withdraws, the flame flickers, and you are left with stillness, the only mirror that shows the unadorned silhouette of truth. Suffering is not an error in the structure of the world. It is the structure. Every pulse of joy is purchased by a debt of anguish. Every moment of peace carries within it the weight of its own undoing. We are not punished, we are made of pain. Our flesh, our thought, our trembling hopes are only variations on a single theme, the impossibility of lasting satisfaction. What is called pleasure is merely the temporary absence of desire. It is not positive, not creative, not permanent. It is a shadow, a lull in the storm. And like all shadows, it is cast by something darker, by the ceaseless craving that precedes it. We mistake this lull for fulfillment, and so we chase it, again and again, each time forgetting that what we seek is not fullness, but merely the end of emptiness. The world appears rich with meaning only because the will projects its own hunger onto it. We speak of purpose, of destiny, of progress, words stitched from the fabric of our own need. There is no purpose but to will, and no will that is ever satisfied. Thus, all meaning collapses inward upon itself, a house built from echo, with no ground beneath. To detach is not to escape. Escape is a fantasy born of the same will that wounds us. Detachment is colder, quieter. It is the seeing through. It is the realization that even the impulse to flee suffering is itself another form of bondage. In detachment, we do not seek relief, we seek clarity, not a better world, but an unclouded gaze. The human face, in its stillest moments, reveals the truth of our condition. Behind the smile, a fear. Behind the ambition, a wound. Behind the love, the terror of loss. Every bond we cherish is a noose we willingly place around our own neck, hoping the tightening will feel like warmth. And so it tightens, and we call it connection. We envy animals not because they lack thought, but because they lack illusion. The bird does not ponder the meaning of its suffering. It suffers, and it moves. It does not build cathedrals of self-deception. It does not dream of salvation. In its gaze there is no question and thus no despair. But we, burdened with the capacity to imagine what is not, suffer doubly. First in the pain itself, and again in the story we wrap around it. We think suffering unjust, personal, avoidable. We turn it into a problem to be solved, rather than the nature of our very being. In doing so, we deepen the wound with every attempt to heal it. To live is to consent to disquiet. To be conscious is to be torn. The will gives birth to the world through desire, and then devours it in disappointment. The cycle is not broken by striving. It is broken only when we cease to believe that striving has meaning. And what remains when the striving ends? Not nothing. Something far stranger, presence without craving, existence without illusion, a silence that does not need to be filled. A soul that no longer claws at time for more, not because it has transcended, but because it has stopped pretending. In that silence, we meet ourselves not as heroes, not as victims, but as flickering forms in a senseless, radiant void. And in that void, we find neither punishment nor reward. Only the stark, still beauty of what is. The illusion of self is the final veil, the most seductive of all mirages. We imagine an I, constant, enduring, worthy of legacy. Yet this self is only a tapestry woven from memory and fear, desire and avoidance. Nothing fixed, nothing real, only a momentary knot in the river of becoming. To cling to identity is to build a shrine on melting ice and call it home. What we call our personality is a performance we do not know we are enacting. The voice in the mind, the preferences we defend, the past we curate, these are not truths, but symptoms of the will's endless attempt to preserve its reflection. We do not live as ourselves, we live as our longing would have us be. In this, we are strangers to our own being, chasing a continuity that never existed. Time deepens this estrangement. The past lingers as regret, the future arrives as anxiety. Each moment is stretched between loss and anticipation. We inhabit none of them. We hover, always half elsewhere. Even in silence, the self rehearses, mourns, schemes. And so we are never present, never whole, only echoes within echoes, grasping for something more permanent than change. Desire fuels this movement quietly, relentlessly. It does not shout, it whispers in the marrow. A subtle agitation, a sense that something is missing, that fulfillment is just beyond the current breath. But the next breath comes, and the emptiness remains. Each desire achieved yields a new hunger, sharper than the last. There is no end, only a circle of fire, walked in silence. And love, how often it is exalted, how rarely it is understood. Love, too, is hunger in disguise. It reaches outward, not to give, but to possess. To complete the self by annexing another's warmth. We call this union, but it is often conquest, veiled in tenderness. And when love dies, we grieve not the other, but the mirror they held up to our own desirability. It was always the self we loved, never the other. Even compassion, that gentle virtue, can be a form of self-soothing. We pity to reassure ourselves that we are good, that we still feel. But true compassion is cold, it does not comfort, it sees. It recognizes suffering not as tragedy, but as structure. It offers no promises. It simply remains present, without the need to mend. In this, it is not humanity's clear. Civilization itself is built upon the denial of this clarity. It distracts, entertains, energizes. It creates goals to pursue, ideals to embody, wars to fight. Not because it is noble, but because it must protect us from the terror of seeing life without illusion. The arts, the sciences, the systems of belief all are structures to shield us from the absurdity of existence. They are not lies, but anesthetics. Necessary, perhaps, but anesthetics nonetheless. We speak often of meaning, as if it were an object we might one day hold. But meaning is a byproduct of will. Where there is no desire, there is no meaning. And so to live without will is to live without interpretation. Events unfold not as fate or punishment, but simply because they must. In this, there is no story-only occurrence. And what is more terrifying to the ego than a life without narrative? Yet within this terror lies freedom. For if there is no story, there is nothing to correct, no legacy to defend. Suffering is no longer a punishment, it is simply a companion, walking beside you on a path that goes nowhere. And because it goes nowhere, you are finally permitted to walk it without haste, without performance. You are free to see, rather than to seek. This freedom is not light, it does not uplift. It is grave. It is the freedom of those who no longer pretend, of those who can watch the world burn and still notice the ash falling like snow. It is the freedom that follows surrender, not resistance, the kind that emerges when the last illusion cracks, and you are left holding nothing but breath. And so we breathe, not because life is beautiful, but because it is what is. We continue, not toward triumph, but toward the quiet acceptance of not knowing. The pain does not vanish, it becomes familiar, like the creak of floorboards in a house long lived in. You no longer fight the noise, you learn its rhythm, you let it sing its low song. In this space, where striving dissolves, something unexpected appears, not hope, not peace, but clarity. You see the world as it is, impermanent, indifferent, aching. You see yourself as you are, a temporary awareness, flickering between dreams. There is no comfort here, only lucidity. And in lucidity, a strange stillness. Stillness that asks for nothing. Stillness that does not resist the howl of the void. Stillness that no longer runs but simply stands, with eyes open, beneath the unblinking stars. To stand beneath the stars with eyes unblinking is not a triumph. It is an exhaustion that finally lets go of hope. The constellations offer no answers, only distance immeasurable, cold, eternal. They do not shine for us. Their light is indifferent, their silence older than grief. And yet, we look upward, not for guidance, but because to look outward is sometimes less painful than to look within. But inward is where all paths return. There, beneath the skin of thoughts, beneath the clothed pretense of personality, one finds the silent machinery of suffering. The will turns without rest. Even in sleep it murmurs through dreams, through restless limbs, through the hunger that awaits the morning. The will never ceases. It does not sleep, it does not love, it only demands. And in its demand, all things are shaped. Nations rise to fulfill it. Religions bloom from its yearning. Every invention is an apology to the emptiness we refuse to name. Even our gods are projections of our will-eternal fathers or mothers, sculpted in desperation, designed to affirm that our pain is seen, that our thirst is not in vain. But gods do not answer, not because they are cruel, but because they are Yusukos thrown into the void, returning only silence. We mistake that silence for punishment. It is not. It is the natural result of crying into a universe that never promised to listen. What we call divine silence is merely the absence of illusion. And so we pray, not to be heard, but to soothe the trembling of our own minds. We do not seek God, we seek the end of fear. But no prayer can quiet the will, because the will prays through us. It seeks endlessly, and every answer it receives becomes the seed of another question. Faith is not the solution, it is another manifestation of thirst. Even wisdom, that last refuge of the weary, is tainted by desire. We seek knowledge not to see, but to control, to master suffering, to find the mechanism by which we might finally escape ourselves. But knowledge is a mirror, and the more we know, the more we see that we are the problem we cannot resolve. There is no escape, because the one who seeks to escape is the very thing that binds us. The self that suffers is the self that resists suffering. To accept this is not despair, it is the first honest breath after a lifetime of holding air. To suffer without resistance is not to be passive, it is to be awake. We speak often of courage, but true courage is not action, it is inaction. Not the battle, but the refusal to believe the battle must be fought. Not the conquest, but the silent letting go of conquest itself. Courage is the still heart that watches pain arrive and does not flinch. It does not posture. It endures, not as endurance is typically praised, but as stone endures, silently, without drama, slowly eroding. The wise do not smile because they have found joy. They smile because they have ceased to need it. Joy is transient, conditional. Peace is what remains, when the need for joy vanishes. And peace is not pleasant, it is neutral, vast, impersonal. It is not what we imagined when we asked for salvation. It is colder, but it is honest. And honesty, though painful, is the only soil where stillness can grow. Not the stillness of ignorance or complacency, but the stillness that sees all things as they are and does not demand that they be otherwise. It watches suffering arise, and it watches it pass. It watches love bloom and fade. It watches the world spin, not with hope, but with awareness. The sun rises each day not as a gift, but as an inevitability. The trees do not blossom for our joy, but because they must. And we too live not for meaning, not for beauty, but because the will drives us, until it doesn't. Until we step back from the wheel and see, if only for a moment, that the road leads nowhere, and in that nowhere, the first taste of freedom. Freedom is not choice. Freedom is the absence of compulsion. When you no longer need, you are free. When you no longer crave, you are free. And in that freedom, the world appears not brighter, but clearer. Its harshness remains, its indifference remains, but the ache to make it otherwise dissolves. And with it, so too the self who suffered so deeply from unmet dreams. What remains is a being stripped of illusion, not holy, not enlightened, simply present, fully immersed in what is, no longer tangled in what could be. Not because it has transcended the human, but because it has surrendered to it, because it knows the price of every illusion and no longer wishes to pay. And so it stands, this naked awareness, amidst the ruins of craving, no longer asking why, no longer pretending it matters. The stars still shine, the wind still speaks in its indifferent whisper. And within, a stillness that does not celebrate, but does not suffer either. A silence, not of emptiness, but of completion. Not because anything is fulfilled, but because there is nothing left to fulfill. What does it mean to no longer seek? It is not apathy, nor is it death. It is the quiet awakening to the truth that nothing sought was ever real. The lover's embrace, the applause of the world, the final breath of achievement will dissolve under the light of awareness, like frost beneath a dying sun. Their sweetness was a mirage, and their bitterness was merely the echo of our own need mirrored back to us. When the will subsides, even briefly, one does not feel elevated, one feels empty. But it is an emptiness without panic. It is the soft absence of tension. A still lake in which no image forms, no ripple disturbs. Most flee this emptiness, terrified of its silence. They call it meaninglessness, as if meaning were something that could be possessed. But it is not meaninglessness that torments it, is the loss of the lie. This loss is not a tragedy. It is the unraveling of a long nightmare. Slowly, the soul that once strained against its own chains begins to see the beauty of their release. The very things it once cherished become weights cast off: ambition, identity, the need to be understood. Each, once a beacon, now revealed as a shackle. Even love, a most sacred illusion, loses its sanctity. Not because it is wrong, but because it was mistaken for permanence. Love, in its clearest form, is not possession. It is not salvation. It is a momentary suspension of loneliness, a meeting of two voids that, for a time, mirror each other kindly. But each will return to itself, to its solitude. This is not cynicism. It is mercy to let what is fleeting remain fleeting, to not demand from it what it cannot give. And what of suffering? When no longer resisted, it reveals itself not as an enemy, but as a guide. It pulls us back from the fire of delusion. It shows us where the will has taken root, where we still believe that life owes us something. Every pain points to a place where we are still clinging. And when we finally let go, not out of strength but out of exhaustion, the pain softens. It does not vanish, it transforms. From torment to signal, from scream to whisper. The whisper says, "Nothing will complete you. No path will return you to innocence. No person will carry your burden. This is the weight of being, and it is yours alone. Not because you are cursed, but because you are conscious. To know you exist is to carry the wound of existence, and to bear it without story, without glory, is the purest form of dignity. Modernity fears this truth. It scrambles to distract you from it. Its noise is a mask, its speed a sedative. It tells you that happiness is the goal, that pain is a problem to be solved. It sells ease, pleasure, identity, all hollow effigies of peace. But none of it will save you, because none of it confronts the core, that the self who wants is the source of unrest. This is not a call to retreat from the world. The world is what it is, brutal, indifferent, intermittently tender. But to walk in it without illusion is to finally walk with clear eyes. You can weep for its suffering and still not wish it to be different. You can love what you know will leave. You can hold the dying and not lie to them. This is not cruelty, it is presence. Presence asks nothing. It does not comfort, but it does not abandon. It stands beside the suffering and does not flinch. It sees the child screaming, the elder fading, the world burning, and it does not turn away. It does not seek the lesson or the reward. It simply remains, witnessing the whole unadorned spectacle of impermanence. And from this witnessing, a strange compassion emerges, not the soft warmth of sentiment, but the fierce clarity of recognition. You suffer, and I suffer. You long, and I long. Not because we are broken, but because we are alive. There is no shame in it, no cure, either. Only the ongoing rhythm of wanting and losing, of remembering and forgetting. To live without illusion is not to be numb. It is to feel everything, but to no longer be deceived by it. The beauty remains, but it is no longer a promise. The grief remains, but it no longer seeks comfort. Life becomes a series of unrepeatable moments, none owned, none hoarded, each allowed to vanish as it arrives. And you, no longer at the center, become the silence in which it all unfolds. The witness, not the actor, the stillness, not the storm. You remain, not above suffering, but no longer consumed by it. You still feel, but you no longer chase the feeling. The fire burns, but you are not the fuel. This is not salvation, it is something quieter, a slow exhale, a gaze that does not look away, a heart no longer asking to be filled. And in that space, untouched by striving, untouched by self, there is only what is. No meaning, no reward, only the soft, steady echo of being. There is no destination for the one who has seen through desire. The road does not lead to enlightenment, nor to some final peace. It simply stretches forward, indifferent to the one who walks it. And still, the walking continues not because there is hope, but because there is breath. The body persists, the heart beats, the world turns. This, too, is will, but stripped of fantasy, devoid of narrative. It is the bare movement of life, emptied of expectation. To exist without chasing is to be neither asleep nor awake in the common sense. It is a third condition, a lucidity born of renunciation, not through asceticism, but through disillusionment. The dreams have died, and in their place stands something unadorned. The world no longer promises, but it also no longer betrays. It is seen, at last, for what it is, a ceaseless play of forms, without author, without meaning, without mercy. And yet, in this desolate clarity, something akin to beauty arises. Not beauty as pleasure, not beauty as fulfillment, but the beauty of sheer presence. A leaf falling in silence. The distant cry of an unseen bird, the way dusk turns the horizon into an open wound. None of it belongs to you. None of it speaks to your story. And that is why it touches something deeper than joy. It touches what remains when joy is no longer needed. The human creature, stripped of its distractions, reveals its true shape. It is not noble, not divine, not destined for grandeur. It is frail, repetitive, driven by mechanisms it cannot fully understand. But in the recognition of this limitation, there is a strange dignity. Not the dignity of pride, but of surrender. To walk upright not because you are triumphant, but because you are no longer pretending to be more than what you are. All narratives collapse here. The hero's journey, the martyr's tale, the pilgrim's pathiach, exposed as variations on the same craving, to matter. But what if you do not matter? What if that is not an indictment, but a release? To no longer matter is to no longer be burdened by the need to perform. Your pain does not need to become a message. Your losses do not need to make you stronger. They can simply be. And in the raw presence of that acceptance, you begin to hear the silence beneath the noise of the mind. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of demand. This silence does not teach, it does not affirm. It simply envelops. and in its cool embrace, the self begins to fray. Not violently, not with panic, but like smoke dissolving into dusk. What remains cannot be named. It is not an identity, not a soul, not a witness. It is a space. A space where pain still exists, but without narrative. Where pleasure still arises, but without attachment. Where others still suffer, and you still ache with them, not from empathy as virtue, but from shared condition. Their tears are yours, their fears are familiar, but you do not seek to fix them. You sit beside them, unmoving, and let the wind pass over both your heads. The culture of noise cannot tolerate this stillness. It calls it defeat, depression, pathology. But those are the names given by the frightened. This stillness is not illness. It is sobriety. The final clarity that dawns when all lights have gone out. It is not dark because something is missing, it is dark because nothing more is being projected. You will be misunderstood. The world will continue to shout. It will demand your participation, your opinion, your optimism, but none of that holds power over you now. You respond, when necessary, not from compulsion, but from stillness. You act, not to change the world, but because action arises. You speak, not to be heard, but because silence sometimes finds a voice. And when the end draws near, because it always does, you do not grasp. You do not plead for more time. You do not clutch at the fading light. You have already died 1,000 small deaths, the death of illusion, the death of hope, the death of identity. The final death is merely a continuation of this letting go. It is the last breath of resistance. Nothing is carried forward. No soul, no memory, no legacy. Only the ceasing of noise, the unraveling of tension. And in that unraveling, not bliss, but peace. Not peace as triumph, but peace as absence. The same absence you have known each time you let go of what never truly was. And so the final scene unfolds, not with glory, not with despair, but with silence. A silence deeper than words, older than stars. The will dissolves, and with it, the illusion of self. What remains is not you. It is not nothing. It is not something. It is only what is, without need, without form. And this is the end, or perhaps the beginning. But no voice remains to ask. Only the quiet persists. No revelation arrives to redeem the silence. No cosmic hand reaches down to bestow closure. The lantern is out, the room unlit, and yet there is no fear. The darkness is not hostile, it is whole. It asks for nothing, not even your understanding. There is no final word, no wisdom to cling to, no insight to preserve in glass. What you sought has fallen away, not because it was false, but because it was never yours. It was a flame briefly held, then released, not extinguished, but returned. And you? You are not what you thought you were. Not the thinker, not the seeker, not the one who suffered. You are the space where all of these passed like shadows, none remaining. There is no center now. No story, no one watching. The stars remain above, unblinking, indifferent. The earth turns. A breeze moves through the void where you once stood. You do not resist it. You do not name it. It passes, as all things must. The will is quiet now, not conquered, not shamed, but simply seen. And in that seeing it dissolves, not into nothingness, but into stillness that neither asks nor refuses. This is not freedom, as we imagined it. It is not rapture, nor transcendence. It is the final intimacy, to exist without needing. No light breaks the sky, no music swells, no curtain falls. Only breather, perhaps not even that. Just this, a nameless presence, without direction, without end. And so nothing is left to be said. The silence is not awaiting words. It is complete. You were never meant to arrive. You were only meant to see.